According to a recent HUD report, North Carolina saw a 300% increase in children struggling with homelessness between 2020 and 2022.
This encampment has been here for about 4 years, if not more. A bit hard to see behind me right now, given that it is so dark. There are 15 of these tent cities around the county, at least the ones that officials know about. But from talking to the people here, as well as that business owner, you get a much better picture of what homelessness is and what folks are trying to do about it.
We are growing rapidly. Our incomes here are not keeping pace with the cost of housing. And so for those who would have been able to maintain their housing before, they just can't make ends meet anymore.
We think we know the people inside and why they're there.
I've had people ride by, laugh at me, and point at me, take pictures. I mean, I just ignore it the best that I can.
If you've driven anywhere in the Triangle, it's obvious that homelessness is a growing problem.
And many of them aren't even from the Tar Heel State. People are coming from New York City by plane, train, bus, and car. Then they're placed in apartments across central North Carolina.
It's definitely an emotional roller coaster whenever you're have nowhere to go and maybe no support sometimes, you know.
Judy, who battled with substance abuse, found the Durham Rescue Mission 4 months ago. She traveled nearly 4 hours from South Carolina after being told most shelters had a waiting list.
Moved here, I met my wife, and we got married here, and we were together 8 years. And then I picked up drinking heavily. I was alcoholic. That was my mistake, which of course, brought me to this situation.
According to an investigation by the New York Post, as well as our New York City CBS affiliate, New York City has been secretly sending their homeless families to North Carolina and offering to pay their rent for 1 year, unknown to their new hometown.
Good morning. I'm Christopher Solomon. I'm a faculty member here at the North Carolina Department of Social Work. That's why I'm going back to my days of being a social worker, but social work professor here in North Carolina Central University. I actually did my internship when I was in college. I was in 1987. I did my internship with Guilford County Department of Social Services and worked in child welfare unit, and more specifically in the foster care unit. So that was my exposure at the very beginning of my schooling part of my professional career, doing an internship at Guilford County, and really learned a lot and saw a lot about children and got an understanding about abuse, neglect, and dependency, and really seeing the court system and how child welfare works through that internship for an academic year. So left there, got a job right out of school in 1989 and worked at a state institution over in Butler, North Carolina. But I had some clients that were involved in social services, and the social workers would come and visit the individuals that were in the foster care system, and they would come and they would visit, and I would have contact with them, and decided that maybe I should go into child welfare and do CPS at a certain point in my career, because it was an interest when I did my internship, because never been exposed to child welfare, never understood what child welfare was. But through that opportunity, I started gaining an interest. So I went, after working in mental health, when I left the state institution, worked in mental health for 5 years, and then in 2000, I gained employment as a child protective services social worker over in Orange County, North Carolina, which is Chapel Hill, and worked there for like 6 years, and then left there and went to the state division and worked for the state, creating policies and still within the child welfare arena, but giving me an opportunity working on that policy piece with my MSW. So I think I'm well versed in child welfare. Love it, still love it to this day. I will go back and work in child welfare. Most people don't understand it, but I worked in all of the units there. Even when I was in graduate school, I did my internship at Wake County Department of Social Services, because I stopped work when I went into my MSW program. So I stopped working in child welfare to be able to do it, but I still loved it. Then I went on back and just did it, but I did mine on the management and community practice side in Wake County. So they gave me an opportunity to really working on the micro level to going all the way to the larger scale and working with the communities in the HC. So again, well versed, gained employment when I was in school because they were short of social workers, and so they offered me, because of my ability to create and to be able to have conversations with the staff, and they were impressed with that. So they offered me like a part-time job when I was in graduate school. So that kind of gave me income. So again, well versed, love it. We'll go back again, I cannot say that enough, but I really would go back and to child welfare whenever if a good opportunity present themselves. But I'm loving the teaching part of my career now and want to educate others on my way out the door towards retirement. But I will go back. I think the children that were in the system, they didn't really have a great start, I would say. When I would read the case and when I became involved with the cases and really saw that the piece of the puzzle was around not having enough food insecurities, parents having a lot of mental health issues, stability in housing, because housing is a main focus, that if they most likely did not have housing, they would stand with relatives. And this is why the system, meaning that child welfare, became involved most of the time, because they did not have housing, which was a concern, because most parents are struggling and they're just trying to find a way. But according to the way our systems are structured and our policies, that they have to have a stable roof. How we define stable might not necessarily be what the families define as being stable, but trying to help them to understand that because of the policies that are in place, sometimes we have to do a mix. But I saw a lot of that, and most of the kids struggle with brain development. I think that we should have a class here about brain processing and how the brain works, and the brain just really have that better understanding how that process works. And if certain needs are not met, then of course that affects a child's brain development and just being exposed to environmental situations that they may be facing. So I saw a lot of those things and really saw that this is still a huge need, and I can appreciate child welfare in certain places and certain the ideal of it. But how do we manage this, and how do we do a win for the families, and how do we do a win for the system as a whole? Because are there some things in place that I disagree with, but at the same time I agree with if the child is abused or if it's neglected or dependency, which we don't really talk about, but if they're really mostly coming in because of injurious environments and not having the proper care, then that would be something that we could possibly work on instead of trying to wait for the system to kick in, but to really try to do some preventive work on the outside of those issues that a family may be facing. Family was trying to work. Um, they had income, but the property values in Orange County and in Guilford County, they're much higher than what the individuals can afford. So that means that they were trying to do the best they can, but when they could not pay the rent, of course, the people had the right to evict them, which means again that put the individuals unhoused. And so I saw a lot of that. The families really were trying, and they really were trying to keep their family unit together, but because of circumstances, and we always talk about situations in social work, that anything can cause a family to have a crisis. And so sometimes I think that because of that, they were struggling to pay. They could not afford it, and the system happened to kick in because they could not afford it at that particular time. I saw it a lot when you go to the school system. I was a surrogate parent for Durham Public Schools for about 5 years, representing the kids or the children that did not have, that were in foster care and they didn't have a parent per se, that the DA social worker could not serve as their parent. So I volunteered to be a surrogate parent. And so when I sat there and you sit in IEP meetings, individual educational plan meetings, that you start seeing a theme. I don't want to use that word too concrete, but you saw different themes come out, meaning child was struggling with reading, child was having difficulty doing math, child cannot sit still, child cannot focus enough to be able to do this, or the teacher constantly having to say something to them. And when these kids are in these situations, and again, because they might not have the proper development when they were first born, or even when they're in utero, that they were going to have some issues. And so I think that when you were talking about the overall well-being of someone, we always look at health when a baby's born. What's the first thing we do? We weigh them. We do the A-gap score, the first minute to 3 minute of life. We try to figure out the higher the score and all those things like that. But when kids are not privileged enough to have those during in utero opportunities or even after birth, that creates some problems. It could be they're injurious environment. Could be that they actually living in roaches and that the things are running around and that animals could be there. It could be different things that you will see, but it plays out in a child. And so in that when it's a child being affected for their overall development, I think about what is that? What does it mean mental health wise? What does it mean for growth, meaning in your developmental stages of life? And which is why I love human behavior, because we talk about it from conception, at the time of conception, to the end of life, and all of those stages are important. And when those developmental milestones, like Erickson's theory about trust versus mistrust, that we see a lot of that. And so in that, it has helped me to understand a family when they're in that situation, not to look at them in it differently, but to really try to help them, especially when it comes down to children, trying to help the children to get a good start and help them to have that. That means providing nutrition, or that's providing tutoring opportunities for a student in order for the family, because sometimes I think that the family is overwhelmed. And that when you're sitting there in meetings like an IEP meeting, especially when I would go take the parents to the school and people using these big words, and you see the parent over there, when you're looking at the parent to understand it, I tend to stop the meeting and say, hey, that was a big word. Did you get that word? Because I didn't even understand it. And why? Because it's important for me to help the parent to become involved. And to help them to connect is my job, I feel, is to connect them. They're already overwhelmed. And you're coming in with these papers and you saying that you got to sign these papers, and they just mean it just to be meaning. They're not really focusing in on the parent, but they say they are, but you can know by their behaviors that they're not. It's my job to stop that and to help and to empower, which is another theory in social work that we use, because we talk about strength-based perspective, but empowering is another one that we should focus in on, because we should want to empower the family. And to help the family means that we should give them all the encouragement, but empowering them to feel like that they are part of this. No matter whatever the mistakes may have been, we can still empower them to do better. It might not be what we want it to be, but whatever better is for them. We have to use our network. Our network is the people that we may know that work in different agencies. Again, this is why I love social work and seeing that. So I purposely get to know people that might have worked in the housing authority, or might got to know people that worked in juvenile justice or adult services or adult correction officers or whatever, and build my network that way. So if I see that a family is coming to me and that they might be unhoused or they don't have enough food or whatever, then I tend to, and I still do this, is to steer them in a way and support them. Now, not saying that it's a handout, because I think sometimes our families are already embarrassed that they have to go to places and they have to tell their story over and over again. So I try to make it a smoother process for them by using my network and utilizing them as my key person to kind of get me in there. And that means that I might know you. Hey Ryan, how you doing today? Let's go ahead and have a conversation. You work at such. Okay. Hey Lucius, you work over here. We could pick up the phone and call each other, and we can have a conversation. Hey, I'm bringing in Christopher today. Can we just do like we normally do? Let's make it a fun way of embracing them and not really focus in on what the issue is. So if I know you work in the house, I know you're working in food, I'm bringing Christopher to you, but we're all having a conversation. And we all can have that conversation by saying, hey, what is it that you need? I found that families are more receptive to that when they feel inclusive, and not that I'm looking at them as being a family or a client, but looking at them as being an individual. And so I think for me, it's important to have that and to utilize my resources that I've gained through networking to touch base. If there's an issue right now, I can pick up the phone and say, hey, Avis, who that works for the school system, the lead school social worker in Orange County. Hey, I got this situation going on. What do you help me? Can I get some feedback so that way at least we can talk internally about what it might be, so I will know how to think. For me, that sometimes that networking is the key to assisting families that you're working with because it's your own. And what does that be? Intra, because that will be your own. So it will be within you. So that will be the intra, INTRA way, and not the inter, where we all sitting there as a team, but to utilize it in that sense. So for me, the resources are something that if I'm not aware, then I'm searching. Back in the old day, before computers really came home, we had to do the phone. And we had to call around. We had to really look through the newspapers or look through the telephone directories to have that sense of who are you. I will go to an agency and still say to the students to this day, get outside of your internship. Just because you're in the school system, they work with juvenile justice, they work with everybody. You want to get out there and use that as your base, but to get there. So I'm one of those old school individuals that will go. When it's a new agency coming online, I don't know anything about them, I will schedule time to go in. Why? Because then I'm going to get that key person on the inside. But I'm going so I can learn. So as I'm talking to my families, then I can talk to them directly because I've been there. I don't want to show up somewhere that I don't know because why? They're fearful already. And when you're talking about child protective services, it's already going to be fear because the system is now a part of their life and they lost their independence and they have to be governed by a system. And so I don't want them to feel like that they are part of, although they are part of a system, but I try to still make them see them as an individual and empower them to go back to the unit. So most of the time, I've only been the only black male in the agency that I worked with. First black male to graduate from a program at UNC Chapel Hill in the school history. So it's like I'm always that pioneer that have to kind of go in there and have to have those hard conversations. Now, I think we talk about race more so than ever now. But back then, when we talk about over 30 some odd years ago, because I started practicing at 34, paid. But again, I shared with you about doing an internship. So I've been at this for about 36 years now. That it was no one that looked like me. There was no one that understood the families that I might have served. And so I had to really go in and work with some of the agencies that did not understand that you can't keep doing it this way. And so when I found myself working in certain places, was that I had to be that advocate. And if it took me to be that advocate, then it took me because it couldn't keep going. And the system was not working in the favor of the families that I worked with. Because let's face it, they gave me the most difficult families. I didn't know it at the time, but I just, which come until my supervisor told me, said, we only hired you because no one could work with this particular family that had 5 kids. The mom was a substance user, and I was able to get all of her 5 kids united back. And because it was a family history of the family being there, because her mom, the kids' 5 mom had, I think, 10 kids, and 5 of those kids end up in the system. So it was like a family history type of thing. But once I got there and I found therapists in the community that looked like them, and the kids can see somebody that looked like them, and they start turning around. Got the mom to understand that you might need to move from your area, and we got to get you somewhere different. We got her to Gifford County, and she did well, and she's still in Gifford County. I still have contact with her. That those are the things that I found myself having to do to get out there and to break the barriers and to break the stigma that it took me to make the sacrifices and to make that argument form. So if I knew if it was going to be a sense of humor that I had to use a sense of humor. I will read the audience first, and then I will make the approach about what needs to happen. So breaking the barriers for me is really about being there, being in the front, and really trying to get it going for the family. Had a family, a young man was from Morocco. I didn't know about Morocco. He didn't want to be here, mental health issues and stuff like that. But once I started figuring out, I got to get it in this family unit, but let me figure out how to get there. So I started asking questions tell me about Morocco. Okay, that's when I learned it was in the continent of Africa and that it was there. Tell me how you got here. His dad was from Morocco, mom was American. He didn't want to come because he was up in age. He was a teenager because of what he thought the U.S. was going to be like, he got that in his head and he didn't want to move. So it took me being involved in learning the culture, sitting there, spending time with them, helping me to understand that it ended up being a win-win because I did not look at him as having mental health issues. I looked at him as being, I need to connect with him. I need to understand his culture. I need to understand everything about his culture so I will know how to get my game plan. Sometimes I think that we don't do a good job about that, and social workers finally moved along and said we need to practice culture competency, but it always went that way. It was what it was, and that was it, and the system was the system. But now we're starting to hear more buzzwords, and we're starting to talk about barriers, we're starting to talk about race that is helping the individuals to get it and helping individuals that can see it much better. It's because of the conversation that we're having today. When I did not have the opportunity of having the conversations, because let's face it, if I said something, I could lose my job. But now we tend to be a little bit more tolerant of the words about race and talking about it from that particular lens because we know that it's an issue. When you're looking at it, that most of our families that are in the systems, they're very transit because they're moving constantly. They're moving, trying to figure out where can they be safe, what can they do. Some could be running from a domestic violence situation, but we don't pick up on it until they probably get somewhere. And this is why the kid end up in the system, so to speak, because mom was trying to run, dad was trying to run, because we always think about women. Men are affected. Because again, we always have these stigmas there, but men are there, but men just don't come out and say certain things because of the way that men are perceived and that, that, oh, you can't do this or whatever like that. But again, we're switching, and that we have to stay open and be receptive to anybody that comes in may be in need of a system. This is why when I worked in child welfare, one of the things that burnt me up was they didn't see men. They always blamed the dad. And that you just need to go pay child support. Well, I saw that as a need because most of the men that I was talking to, yes, they might have been incarcerated, or yes, some circumstances might have happened. They were young, but they wanted to be a parent. And so I purposely wrote a grant for fatherhood group and had the whole men that I did it for 5 years, was to be it. And then had the men to go talk to child welfare, talk to the court systems, because again, if I'm trying to do it from a systemic perspective, then they all need to go say their voices to the individual departments that were serving them and allegedly had these allegations against them. And it worked because the perception started changing about men and about that we want to be fathers, we want to be a part of our kids' life, but because of the way the system has been set up, you attack the man. And instead of you listening to the man, you attack. And so when I saw that, again, I wrote a grant for 5 years, well, for funding for 5 years, so we can have a fatherhood group. Because for me, it's very important. I grew up in a 2-parent household, so I don't know the struggle of not having a parent present. I don't know, but I can imagine from the families that I work with what the life is looking like and about not having that father present. And most of the families that were in social services, they was always centered around the father not being present. So, that was another thing that was probably a barrier that I wanted to address. I didn't say I have to, but that I addressed in a way to still provide support to men and to be able to have that opportunity for men voices to be heard equally and fairly. You can't dictate to people. You have to coach, and you have to do it in a way that you're supporting them and helping them to see what it could look like. I don't like the word advice. I don't use the word advice because that always gets you into trouble. Because what you tell somebody what to do, you give them advice. The first thing they do is come back. So I purposely do not use those words. I use, did you consider, or have you looked at it this way? What about that way? Giving people options, so that way if they choose whatever they choose from those options that was discussed, then if they come back, then you can say, wait, I didn't give you that advice. I gave you some solutions and you chose, because what you want to do is to get someone to own it. And when they've been in the systems for such a long time, they don't know because they want to blame the system and not understanding that because of some of the behaviors that you did, then here was the outcome. But you have an opportunity to turn it around. So I purposely do not use advice because that word just gets you into trouble because then a person will feel like that you told them. We don't want to do that. We want to get them to make their own decisions or whatever decisions that they make. We respect them. And so I learned that really when I was in child welfare, that's when I learned that word. Stay away from that word and don't use it. I think funding. I think our lawmakers don't understand a lot of work that we do until when it affects their family. That's when we see funding come through. I always say, I think about Betty Ford and mental health and about alcohol use. That's when funding started coming through. So it's like when it's a theme, you tend to get more funding. Right now it's fentanyl. You're getting more money for fentanyl right now. But I think for me is that when the funding is not there, then it creates problems. Back in the day when everybody used to say welfare, I remember when it was the paper money, and now you can swipe a card. And so in it, the more kids that you had, the more money you got. Well, when Reagan came around and he did TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, and kind of changed it up a little bit, then it would be put sanctions on welfare. And what the welfare looked like wasn't the same. So some families got used to the more kids that they had, the more funding you got, and you had more stability. Well, we're seeing now that housing vouchers are not available, that people are on waiting list for 5 to 6 years. So if you're talking about unhoused, most people are going to be unhoused, but they can't get housing. So that's going to create another barrier because then the list's going to get longer. So when do we find a balance about really trying to get it? Why do we have to wait for kids that'll be with a family and with a mom? You could tend to find them housing first, but you can't find the housing together when it's a family unit. And so in that, most of the time when the fathers were not involved and the women were there, you heard, and I'm sure you all heard this, that, if the man is in the house or somebody's in the house, but they won't own the lease, then that create a problem. Well, if the dad was trying to come back and be reunited, then the family's getting ready to go upside down because what? The system now has kicked in. So we're not fair in how we look at things. We just go by what's there. And even with the Medicaid expansion that's just happening here in North Carolina, that it took years because we wanted to have it years ago, but because the federal government offered $1.8 billion, then all of a sudden our legislature decided, we're going to do this now. What? When we have already seen this need, which is again about a barrier for the kids that are in foster care, because when I was in grad school, my emphasis was on kids aging out of the foster care system. That's what I did my research on. What kid can function at 18 and they've been in the system, but yet and still we kick them out? Or we offer them a voluntary placement agreement, a VPA, for them to be able to stay in foster care, and then we give you a little bit of this. But the system was not friendly to them. Why do you think they're going to stay in the system? So we have to do a better job about figuring out how to make this work, because the kids that are coming out of foster care, they're probably going to be the one that's going to be unhoused in the long run because they don't know how to. I'm not going to say they don't know how. Their ability to connect because of everything that might have happened to them might take them a little longer to get going in life. And so that creates more of that. And that to me, that's some of the causes because of funding. It really goes back to me for funding for every single thing. Now, of course, the families, but it's about funding, or you can't afford to stay somewhere. Right now, who can stay in Durham? God forbid, Durham and Chapel Hill don't even want to merge the school system because they want to keep their system separate. Because of the taxes are higher in Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill tends to have better test scores, and they don't want to be in the system with the county. So they purposely have not merged their two school systems where everybody else in the state has done this. So privilege comes with money. Yeah. Privilege comes with how the laws can be made versus it being overall comprehensive. We know that negotiations go on, but sometimes we don't win. And most of the time, the families that we're serving, they don't win. I think what I said earlier, staying open and really looking at how do you now build your network and how do you utilize your networking skills to try to meet the needs. Don't just assume a lot of stuff, but be smart, be creative about your thinking and your logic about how do I create something if it's not present. Maybe I need to write a grant. Maybe I need to think about being an advocate or being a broker and using all these various roles that we serve as social workers, but really trying to be the one to go out there. And so I'm always saying, go against the grain, because for me, that's all I know. I go against the grain. I'm going to push it. I'm going to push it for multiple reasons because, because of my skin color, I'm black, I'm a male, not a lot of black male social workers in the field as it is, but I'm going to try to push it. But for a new worker, I would say, make sure you read, but go ahead and go beyond. You have to know the laws. You have to understand that policy goes into play. I think that sometimes that when we get our degrees, we forget. But social work is really about integrating. You have to integrate all of your learning when it comes to social work, which is the beauty because you can't compartmentalize your learning. And so I think that I will say that if you have a social work degree, is that you have to go back and remember human behavior. You have to go back and remember policy. You have to go back that you're an advocate in all the roles that we play, that you have to do those things. And you have to figure out a way, how do I improve the system, be it on a family level, community level, age level, groups or whatever that we work in, but how do I now get this? Because homeless can be addressed, but it's going to require a lot of work and it's going to require everybody getting on one accord about it. Housing has to sit with us. Medical has to sit with us. Schools need to sit with us. Everybody, nutrition is a major part of it. All of these need to be at the table and we need to focus on how to do this. And so I will say to the worker, be that person to go out there to bring everybody together. Help them to understand that this is a job, but I'm a social worker and I got to lead on this. Let me lead this effort. Let me try to figure out ways and solutions to make this a better situation for someone. If you fail, it's okay, because guess what? I'm still here to support you. Because supervisors are important. Utilize your support system as a supervisor and keep them in the loop.